favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. We'll proceed in that way. Thank you, honorable members. The next speaker on our list is the Honorable Bharrat Jagdeo.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had intended to start my presentation differently. I wanted to say to the Honorable Minister of Finance that having worked for 15 years under the People's Progressive Party government, he was not removed from the Ministry of Finance. He had held in that ministry some very important positions. I expected a better budget from you, Winston. But Mr. Speaker, our dear Vice President started his debate presentation, his speech in the House, by claiming that we on this side of the House are attempting to rewrite history. And he used, to support this argument, a set of facts according to the dear Vice President. May I inform the House that our dear Vice President, Carl Greenidge, had it very wrong. He said, Mr. Speaker, that the People's Progressive Party reduced the employment in the public service by 3,000 in 1993. In 1985, I think that's the time when the Vice President, the current Vice President, Carl Greenidge, became Minister of Finance. The employment in the public service was 28,686 persons. In 1991, it dropped to 18,361. 10,000 reduction. And this is your budget. This is the last budget presentation of Mr. Carl Greenidge. I'm not making this up. 10,000 reduction in the public service between 1985 and 1991. You decimated the private sector, the public sector. Mr. Speaker, not only was the public sector decimated in terms of numbers, but they were pauperized. They were pauperized because when the exchange rate moved from, and I don't remember now what it was in 85, I think it was 4-1, but I may accept that it was 10-1. If it was 4.5-1, it moved in 6 years from 4.5 to $1 to 115 to Ghana dollars to $1 by 1991, and that's your figure because you said it was 115 and it moved to 210, 212, which is a 95% depreciation. Mr. Speaker, just imagine, I haven't even calculated what the percentage of the depreciation would be if it was 4-1 and it moved to 115-1. It runs into the thousands of percentage points. Thousands in 6 years. And he is very proud to talk about how the exchange rate depreciated under the People's Progressive Party. Mr. Speaker, we heard about the 19. May I show the House this book here? This is the estimates from 1992. In these estimates, the budget of 1992, we have a fiscal deficit budgeted that is over 50% of GDP. A 50% of GDP, and the honorable member Winston Jordan has come to this House after we have just handed him a good economy with a deficit of 2.9% of GDP. 2.9% of GDP versus 50% of GDP. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, I must ask you to address the chair.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. With this sort of deficit, to finance the deficit, every 2 years, we were doubling the debt. We were doubling the debt of the country because the deficit has to be financed from somewhere. And it can come from revenue, it can come from grants, or it can come from loans. And so, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member, Winston Carl Greenidge, left us with a fiscal deficit that was 50% of GDP. But more so, he left us with a debt repayment that was 124% of revenue. 124% of revenue. And Mr. Speaker, it could be gleaned from this book here. Mr. Speaker, he said we wanted to rewrite history. He started off by talking about his tenure. And so, you're backing down now. You're backing down now. That's it. So, and the young member of parliament from Linden, when you speak about the youth being left with a debt burden and that they have to pay back this debt burden, just imagine that to service that deficit, it took almost 100% of revenue when we got into office. Today, it's less than 5% of revenue. You left a bankrupt country. Today, we have the most vibrant economy in the entire region. The ERP, ask Moses about the ERP. Mr. Speaker, he spoke about corruption. The honorable member Carl Greenidge spoke about corruption and spoke about that era too. And we all know I had not honestly intended to go back to that era. But today, since our dear Vice President took us back there, may we speak a bit about GT&T? Maybe speak about the Lord Weaverbrook deal. Can you, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to address him directly, so I'll address you. Mr. Speaker, we had a series of privatization conducted at the time when the PNC was in office. None of those entities had an independent valuation done. They were privatized by 5 different entities in government. The Public Cooperation Secretariat, Ministry of Finance was part of some of the privatization. State Planning Secretariat privatized others. The Office of President privatized some other entities. The reason that we believe that there was no valuation, and secondly, that they were privatized by different entities, was to share the spoils at that time. To share the spoils. because there was no transparent system of privatizing entities. How did the People's Progressive Party remedy this? From the time we assumed office, Mr. Speaker, we halted all the privatization. We contracted the UNDP to develop, working with us, a white paper. That white paper was tabled in the Parliament and debated. We then set up a technical unit, the privatization unit, that would report to a board that had 3 members from the private sector, the labor movement, and the consumer affairs. Only after they had considered every privatized entity, then it would go to the cabinet for approval. And until today, that system still holds in place. In the part, that is transparency for you. And Mr. Speaker, further to that, I hear a lot about public procurement. When the PNC left office under the tenure of our Honorable Vice President Carl Greenidge, we did not have a Procurement Act. We procure goods and services from the private sector based on 4 pages of regulations in the 1950s, another 3 pages from the 1920s, and some ST circulars. There was no act in place that had the force of law. In 2004, we passed a comprehensive Procurement Act that gave the right of appeal to contractors. We removed the cabinet from the consideration of contracts and approving contracts. They had to give only a no objection. And the no objection says that if the cabinet does not agree to a tender, it has to state the reason why. It cannot change the bid. It sends it back to the Central Tender Board. That is the change. That was transparency for you, Honorable Member Carl Greenidge. So, comrades, honorable members, the legacy of Mr. Carl Greenidge, the legacy of Mr. Carl Greenidge, honorable member, was 10 years without audited accounts. Today, he prohibited, the honorable member prohibited.
Mr. Speaker, the
Don't
honorable
get hot
member,
under the collar,
the
man. I'm
honorable
going, just starting.
enjoys fabricating events. Let me just say to you first of
Honorable
all,
member.
the valuation,
Please yield.
GT&T was valued by
Honorable member, what is it that you are?
I'm calling, Mr. Speaker, to ask the Speaker to refrain from misrepresenting the facts. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Please proceed.
am I misrepresenting the facts when the former Auditor General, a close friend of APNU, said that he was prohibited by the Minister of Finance at that time, Mr. Anand Gulsaran, from auditing privatization proceeds?
It is not true, Mr. Speaker.
I think,
the letter is in the public domain. The letter is in the public domain.
If I would suggest, honorable member, please. If I would suggest, we should probably try to avoid the hearsay. He said that I said and told me so.
Mr. Speaker,
And
this is in the public domain. It is not hearsay, and I don't have it here, but I can get a copy and bring it to your office. Mr. So much for records.
Honorable member,
so much for records.
Honorable member, we should try to avoid that.
Yes.
The speaker is not part of the debate, so he wouldn't want to receive documents of proof.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, is it also not true that the entire revenue from gold proceeds that were exported at that time, all of our gold, went to a private account in Canada, managed by a private individual? that the office of the president at that time had access to, rather than being paid into the consolidated fund. Is that not true too? Is that not true? And Mr. Speaker, I can stand here. The inflation rate in 1991 was triple digit. We've had single digit inflation. We had a net international reserve of 17 million. Today it stands at 635 million. That's the difference. That is the difference. And if you want to talk history here or rewrite history, do not think we're going to be just sitting passively and not respond to you, Honorable Vice President. Mr. Speaker, may we speak a bit more about foreign policy? And I do not want to get caught up just in responding to the former the Minister of Finance. But I was intrigued by his statement that a member on our side should not have criticized President Granger, and I agree with that. I agree with that absolutely. We must in this country protect our presidents from unfair criticism by anyone. But when a United States ambassador criticized our president, said he didn't know what he was doing, said he was misleading people, we responded, Mr. Speaker. At the last July 4th activity, we were laughed at by the Prime Minister, and we were told that there would be no more feral blasts. Well, there will be feral blasts, and there should be feral blasts from both sides of the House if anyone dares to disrespect our president. We didn't have the feral blast because he spoke about local government elections. It was because of his criticisms personally of our president. That is why we responded. And so what is good for the goose should be good for the gander. And Mr. Speaker, I was also intrigued by the Honorable Carl Greenwich saying, since they've assumed office, they've seen an increase in visa applications because of terrorism. Is he saying that the terrorists feel that they can get comfort in Guyana
Mr.
today?
Speaker, please.
Is this what he's telling the House, that the terrorists feel that there is a new government that they can be comfortable with?
Mr. Speaker, we are dealing with bilateral relations here. I don't want it to be said that I said in relation to visas, I was speaking to Bangladesh and India. And I'm saying that I never said, Mr. Speaker, I just would like the Speaker to quote me correctly. And I never...
Honorable member, it is good if you say what you said.
Yeah.
That would be good.
I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that we had been advised by governments in the region of the movement of potential terrorists. That's what I said. I didn't say anything about those specific persons.
It's late at night, Mr. Speaker, so I'll forgive the honorable member for not remembering what he said. Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House agree that our borders are sacred and that we all have to unequivocally defend those borders regardless of the circumstances. We cannot be ambiguous about this issue. But I want to caution our Vice President, who has responsibility for foreign affairs, that the unilateral route to border policy often creates unintended problems. And let us examine a couple of past experiences. In this House, former minister, Mr. Fred Wills, said, there is no doubt about it. The high water mark on our side of the Quarantine River is the border. We have been now stuck with that problem. We said, and we have always argued, when a minister of the government says that in this House, and that would have seemed to be the accepted policy for a long time, it was a nightmare for us to return to what we did. And we were accused of being revisionists. I was personally accused of being revisionist when I said that it's either midpoint in the river, Talueg, or we'd have to have full use of rights. The second, on the same border issue, the agreement by Mr. Burnham and Mr. Sidney in 1970 used one word that has been misused by Suriname, conveniently. It spoke about the demilitarization of the Upper Quarantine. And they have interpreted that to mean that since we agreed to demilitarize the area, somehow we were accepting their claim to the New River Triangle. And they have misused that in Suriname and elsewhere. A single word made a huge difference. And then again, on the maritime boundary, we had in the 70s and early 80s issued through GGMC several mining leases and prospecting leases, and several wells were drilled by Royal Dutch Company, Shell Company, and some others. Suriname never protested. We had awarded drilling permits all the way to 34 degrees east of True North. And then we developed some maps that were further west. Our Lands and Survey Department developed some maps that were further west of the areas that we had been giving licenses to and Suriname had not protested. So when we came to that issue of dealing with it, it compromised our arguments under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, because our own maps were claiming the midpoint or the equidistance, when our historical claims were further east of the equidistant point. So that created problems for us. And it compromised our negotiations, even at the bilateral level, because every time I argued for 34, they pulled out our own maps and said, here is what your government entities have produced. So it is wrong to claim that. And the same thing, we believe that the Geneva Agreement is being misused too. But because we allow a few words to go in there that can create ambiguity, then the opposing party will jump on every such instance to enhance their claim. And so I urge the Foreign Ministry and the Minister to be very careful about this issue. Our commitment to defending our border should never be questioned. It was in 1999 that I went to the first heads of government meeting just after becoming president. And if you check the communique of the Commonwealth heads of government meeting, I checked the years prior to 1999. That was the first time that Venezuela border conflict was put there. I lobbied several African leaders and others to get them to support the inclusion in the communique, their solidarity, the Commonwealth solidarity with, on the Venezuela border controversy. And therefore, we got them to further establish a ministerial group to examine developments in relation to that border. And in Perth, just in 2011, you would see that a report was done by the ministerial group to the heads of government, commenting on our claim to the extended continental shelf. So we believe in multilateralism. We believe in this approach that small countries' best interests, or their interests are best served by being part of multilateral engagements. But that doesn't preclude good bilateral relations. And this is where we have a problem, Honorable Vice President. You never refuse in diplomacy the opportunity to talk. You cannot say, go talk to CARICOM. The fact will remain is that Venezuela will always be our neighbors. And how is it that we can, even if it is not sanctioned, if it's not an economic sanction, but how is it that we can allow $200,000 worth of grant not being put up by an airline to blind us to the fact that we had received on the other side of the balance sheet over $750 million in soft loans from Venezuela, and that they have a huge rice market? And you have to separate, like I did with the president of Suriname. We sat and we said, let's put the border issue aside, not that we are compromising our positions on them, but bring functional cooperation to the fore. And so attitudes are very important. You cannot refuse to talk. You cannot shout across the borders at each other. You have to talk to each other. Venezuela has been a good friend of ours in the area of functional cooperation. They claim our borders, and we believe they claim our land, and we believe that's unjust. And right here in Guyana, after speaking to President Chavez and giving him the documents coming out of the CIA and others from the 60s, he went straight to another meeting and claimed, and he said this publicly, that the claim by Venezuela to our border in 1962 was an imperialist invention and plot. We have to talk to people. We have to get back that rice deal. We cannot, every year the Venezuelans said, we're not going to buy the rice. And every year we went because of good relations and got it extended. Because it is in their interest too. It is in their interest too, because they're getting prepaid. The loans that they're making to the rest of the Caribbean, they're getting repaid over 17 years and 25 years. In our case, they get it now. If you look at the time value of money, it benefits them. But what do? We get also a premium of $300 more on the price of rice. So it benefits us too. And the rice farmers alone have gotten in that premium above the world market price over $40 billion in 6 years on the premium alone, because the total rice export to Venezuela was $560 million. So we have to secure that. We have to get Petro-Caribbean extended, because it provides a facility for us that allows us to engage in trade financing. And I was very disappointed that the Minister of Finance brought in Petro-Caribbean proceeds into the budget. So when the nation thought that $23 billion would be given to rice farmers to buy their rice, it was just a paper transaction reflecting what had been done in the past, but now brought on the books to create the impression that something new was being done for the rice industry. Not a single thing has been done for the rice industry in this budget, contrary to your promises on the campaign trail that you will pay higher prices for rice. You will pay $6,000 a bag for paddy and $9,000. You need to look at this. And I was very disappointed. Maybe I shouldn't say that because you can't say things about the president, but I saw, it was reported that the president said, it's a private industry, and therefore do not look for too much help from the government. If that is accurate, Mr. Speaker, then the industry, cannot look forward to any help from the government. And this is going to be very sad. You know, we should be happy that we're producing close to 700,000 tons of rice now, up from a paltry amount in the past. And people talk about crisis in the industry. Who responds to lack of support by greater production? It's a market signal. They knew that there were more markets, a sympathetic government. They knew their money would be spent on drainage and irrigation. They knew that money would be, we will go out and seek markets for them. Therefore, they responded by producing. Should we not encourage this? It has now grown to the biggest foreign currency earner, or one of the biggest foreign currency earner for the country. And so it has implications for entire macroeconomy. This should be done. We should support the rice industry, not because they vote mainly for the People's Progressive Party, but because they're good for Guyana. They're good for Guyana, their production. Mr. Speaker, the budget response, I saw the call of the private sector. And let us not delude ourselves when we sit in this house, on both sides. We have been talking to people, as I'm sure you have been doing. And if you talk to the people on Regent Street, they will tell you that few people are coming into our stores. We're selling $400,000 per day in the past, and we're selling $30,000 now, sometimes $100,000. Money has gone, the circulation of money in the system has gone down. Yes. We will come to when. Whether it's last year or this year, you have an obligation to deal with it. You have to deal with it. People are losing their jobs in the private sector. I don't want to call the names of the companies, private companies, but they are laying people off. If you go to the wharf and speak to the stevedores, because less demand in the system, a decline in retail trade, less imports, they're getting less work. The contractors now had to lay off a lot of people. This is the real world out there. And so if we're going to provide a budget, that, as you claim, the economy has slowed down, what happens in the rest of the world when the economy slows down? When they go into economy starts going into crisis, they do anti-cyclical measures. So the spending, I hear the Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker, saying spending, government spending. But the Minister of Finance needs to know that the equation, gross domestic product, is equal to consumption, private investment, government spending, and net exports. So assuming that he presents a budget to this House that is the same like last year, so that's not a stimulus, it's the same. So the difference is $2 billion. It's the same. What has this budget done to stimulate the three other variables in this equation: private consumption, private investment, and exports. He has done very little, nothing, absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And don't talk anything, Mr. Bulkan, because I know, Honorable Member Bulkan, because I know, all right, I'm not saying it, Carl. I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. So, Mr. Speaker, this budget operates, and this Minister of Finance operates on the flawed assumption that he can tackle the economy by dealing only with one element of the equation. It's a fallacy. In the world, the Minister of Finance is quarreling. Mr. Speaker, he'll have a chance to speak. And I know I'm getting under his skin because he presented a flawed budget. And your colleagues need to know that too. Your colleagues need to know that too. So I was just saying, when the world, the economy goes into crisis, they have deployed either one of two things. They have done one of two things. Either increase the government spending, Keynesian, or increase money supply, or a combination of both. And what he has done, he has not done any such incentive on the Keynesian side. And then he is talking about withdrawing money held in private accounts, government money. He is shrinking money supply. This is not anti-cyclical, this is pro-cyclical. You're going to drive the economy into greater problems. You're going to drive the economy into greater problems. It is a flawed economy. And if, Mr. Speaker, if the minister feels so strongly, as they did yesterday, that all of this money is illegal, they should transfer the money today. Yeah, because it's easy. It could be done with a single stroke of the pen. And if they don't do it, it means the same reason they attributed that, right, exactly, that we were keeping it outside to thief, then they're keeping the money outside of the budget to thief it. And I heard the minister speak about voodoo economics.
Honorable member, you will allow me, please resume your seat. Honorable members, let's try to keep the language parliamentary at least. Certain words being hurled across do not do justice, does not show respect for this noble house. Honorable members, I'll ask you not to anticipate the speaker.
So,
what I'm asking members to do is to control their responses and their reactions to the speakers. Yes. Thank you. Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, this is very important because if we do not get the right framework, the budget is a lackluster budget. It is underwhelming. That's what I said. It does not respond to the concerns of the people out there. It doesn't focus on those who are losing their jobs. It doesn't focus on creating wealth. What it does, it focuses on redistribution. And even that the Honorable Minister has wrong because, as my colleagues have pointed out, he gives with one hand and takes with the other. And I noticed that in the budget, he did not say the cost, the removal of the subsidy for NIS. He did not put a cost to that, nor did he put a cost to the withdrawal of the subsidy to pensioners. What he did, Mr. Speaker, if we want to move this country forward, we have to have a budget that responds to the needs of the people. That the cry of the private sector, with this budget, In 2 years' time, 3 years' time, the economy would flatline. It would flatline. Already the demand for housing stock, and you talk to the real estate agents if you don't believe me, they can't sell a single house. Because people are anticipating the drop in the value of homes. Mr. Speaker, have them speak to the people who are selling motor vehicles, and they will tell you that the sales are drying up. People are holding on to the spending now, the money that they have, because they're not getting the right signals from this government. And that is why I said it's a crisis of confidence, because the minister in his budget has not tackled the key issues. He has it philosophically wrong. He has it philosophically wrong. He has not dealt in any great details. You know, he talks about remission level, $55 billion of remission for friends and family. He didn't tell us what GDP revenue to GDP ratio he wants to target. And if you remove all these remissions, then banks DIH will stop getting some of their concessions. All the manufacturers will get their concession. People who are importing, people who are importing vehicles, the migrants, etc., will stop getting their concessions, because the remissions, Mr. Speaker. Oh God, you want me to quote it, Winston? Mr. Speaker, I am addressing you. The implication is that the minister in the budget spoke about remissions being too high, that they're given to friends and family of the PPP. Under remissions, all of these things fall, as the Honorable Carl Greenidge would know. And so he is not saying, is he proposing a tax increase? Because if you remove remissions for the private sector, it's an effective tax increase. And that's why I asked him what revenue to GDP ratio he's targeting, because he has not said so in the budget. The budget is vague and often vacuous, and it does not have any measures to address the concerns of people out there. Mr. Speaker, he says about a good life, and I was wondering where this good life came from. And then I look at the PPP Civic Manifesto on page 6. On page 6 here, we have creating a good life for people. You even had to place where it says, this is our manifesto, which came out before. Mr. Speaker, page 6, a good life. Mr. Speaker, we issued our manifesto before we had to nudge there out of there. It was a good life. And Mr. Speaker, he spoke about a green economy. A green economy. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister of Finance spoke about a green economy. But there's not a single green initiative in the budget. And I have not heard any member on the other side speak about the low carbon development strategy or whatever else you will call it. But the project that has the potential of decarbonizing 95% of our energy sector, he has come to this house and said it's a criminal to go forward with that project. What he's implying, Mr. Speaker, is that the IDB, the Norwegians, Site Global, which is a subsidiary of Blackstone, and the Honorable Cathy Hughes was I think the public relations officer for that firm, and Mr. Nigel Hughes was he was a company secretary for that firm. Mr. Speaker, he's saying that all of these people are corrupt, that we were the Norwegians, the IDB, the government of Guyana, Blackstone, one of the biggest companies in the world, China Rail all got together in a corrupt act to perpetrate this project on the country. What are the facts? He also claimed that the Inter-American Development Bank has withdrawn support or somehow thinks the project is too risky. Well, this is news to me because here I have a mandate letter signed by the Inter-American Development Bank in January of this year. The vice president of the bank signed this year after with the developer to raise $150 million for this project. Now, it's either this is wrong, Mr. Speaker, but regardless of all of this, let's go through the project economics because they have misled the public. I was traveling before I came back to Guyana, when I was a private citizen. And I saw in Parliament debate, there were some members, parliamentary debate, some members outdoing each other to say what the loan to Guyana would be if we proceed with this project. So it ranged from $750 million right to $2.1 billion. With every Tom, Dick, and Harry putting in a number in between. Mr. Speaker, the loan, there is no loan excepting that which the Honorable Member, Mr. Jordan, mentioned in this House. It's not $750 million. The loan to the project will be $40 million from the Inter-American Development Bank. The road, that is the extent of it, $40 million. The cost of the road, it's either 35 or 45 million. And 80 million comes from a grant from Norway, a grant, not the taxpayers' money. But what do we get from all of this? And we now take in the reserves, 65 million. It's an LC. It's not going to disappear. It's going to still be ours. So Mr. Speaker, let's look at these numbers. So what are we getting in exchange for spending $40 million of our own money? Or assuming it's all our money, $165 million. We are getting the largest private sector investment in the history of Guyana. On the project economics itself. Now, this will not be a project owned by the government of Guyana. They will sell power to us, Mr. Speaker. The minister said that they will sell power to us at $130 million per annum for 20 years. The figure is a difference of $3.5 billion that we will save this country. And after 20 years, the cost of power comes down from about 10 cents per kilowatt hour to 2 cents per kilowatt hour. Mr. Speaker, this is criminal not to go forward with the project. The next thing though, if we ignore all of the project economics. Remember, we're not spending money. We're just buying power. Assuming that the project goes forward, do you know the flow through the economy? The growth in GDP that this will bring? $700 million. Catalyzing, we are using $165 million to catalyze a huge investment, Mr. Speaker, but more so than everything else. And the Honorable Vice President Carl Greenidge should listen to this carefully. This Amila project is the ultimate act of expression of sovereignty. We have the Inter-American Development Bank, comprising of almost all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, participating in this deal. We have China participating in this deal. We have Norway participating in this deal. We had an American investor, one of the biggest companies in the world. And this project would have been built in the Essequibo. The Essequibo. What is more an act of sovereignty? Even Venezuela sits at the Inter-American Development Bank and did not object to it. The thing is, it was the ultimate expression of sovereignty. But they killed it. They killed it because it started under us. And then, Mr. Speaker, the alternative was to start discussing with the Brazilians some project. Let me tell you the history of that, Mr. Speaker. When President Lula and I opened the Takatu Bridge, Donald Ramotar was with me, and the President Dilma was with President Lula. And he said, can we do something together on energy? And I said, we would examine that, but of course it had to be feasible, beneficial to Guyana. It has to be socially acceptable and environmentally acceptable to our people. And so he sent his Minister of Energy along with the Development Bank from Brazil with some contractors, and we had an MOU, and the discussion started. So the minister cleverly slips that in there as though it's new. So you're ignoring a mile because we have developed this project. And let me tell you something. Let me tell you, if we miss this opportunity, we're taking another 20 years to get hydropower. You remember the failed project that started, and Honorable Member Carl Greenidge, you will know that we paid back about $300 million of debt. It was in the budget on that failed project. It was part of the debt profile in the past, and we did not get a kilowatt of electricity, not a kilowatt of electricity. If we miss this opportunity, this country will never forgive us, and it is part of a green economy. It's part of a green economy, Mr. Speaker. So I urge the minister not to come and respond in fluff again. Respond in specific terms. Mr. Speaker, I would like the minister to respond, since there have been major protestations on the part of my colleagues on the opposite side about this increase in salary for ministers. And they said, no, it never happened. We were not even considering it. And I perfectly understand if that is true. So will the Minister of Finance give us the assurance, or the Honorable Prime Minister, that ministers are not going to get an increase above that of public servants in the 5 years in their office? Will he give us that assurance here tonight in the House? I would like to get that assurance from him. And if he does not, Mr. Speaker, if he does not, there is something sinister afoot. There's something sinister afoot. Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I did some rough calculations. The Honorable Prime Minister is now going to cost us about $90-something million a year. After 5 years, he'll cost us $500 million. And the Honorable Vice President Ramjatan and other Vice Presidents will cost us about $60 million a year. I served this country for 12 years. Mr. Speaker, 18 years of service, 12 as president. My pension is akin to what the others get. But frankly speaking, 3 months the Prime Minister serves the country. For 3 months. And his pension, if he retires today, will be close to mine, almost, I think, bigger than mine. And guess what portfolio he has? I had to manage the entire country as president. He has a portfolio that Kwame McCoy had from our side. Comrades, there must be some justice. There must be some justice in this world. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I saying that the key thing is trust. We know, Mr. Speaker, do people trust the new government? The Honorable Member Carl Greenwich knows about credit ratings and when we were on credit worthy and loans were not given to the country. Let's look at the credit worthiness of the new government. And Mr. Speaker, the accord says, the accord says, Cummingburg Accord, the Prime Minister shall have responsibility for domestic affairs and chairing the cabinet, recommending ministerial appointments and providing the organizational structures of ministries for approval of the President, appointing heads of agencies and non-constitutional commissions, and domestic security. I don't need to tell you what the reality is. The reality is that we have a Prime Minister today who has a lot of security, but his portfolio is NCN, GINA, and the Chronicle. That is his portfolio. If you can't be faithful to your partner, Mr. Speaker, if this government can't be faithful to their partner in government, how are they going to fulfill the promises to the people of our country? How are they going to fulfill the promises to the people of the country? Even the Honorable Member Trotman has been fired from the Speaker's position because they have a better Speaker now, Mr. Speaker. And he has been given a junior portfolio in the Ministry of Defense. And the Honorable Ramjatan has been given 1/3 of a ministry. Right. So if you cannot, Mr. Speaker, if you cannot be faithful to your word, to your partners, then how can you be faithful and true to the word that you give to the people? It is a huge problem of credibility that this government has. And Mr. Speaker, this government is notorious for backpedaling, for changing its mind. Notorious. So when we pointed out that the increases for public servants were paltry in this budget, the Honorable Member, Mr. Harman, said, oh, the wages are temporary. They're temporary. So we are waiting for the final payment to the public servants. Since the Honorable Member Joe Harman said that the increases given in this budget are temporary. So I want to urge Mr. Patrick Yard from the GPSU to roll over to the Ministry of Finance and ask, say, since the minister in the office of the presidency said these are temporary wage increases, when are we going to have final wage increases? Secondly, they backpedaled again, Mr. Speaker. After firing the 1,952 Amerindians, and Mr. Trotman, that you were justifying firing people. Yeah, and I think you didn't mean those people. So Mr. Trotman sought to justify the firing, Mr. Speaker. Yes, the honorable member, Mr. Trotman, sought to justify firing of people. Is he justifying the firing of these 1,952 persons? Is it not the biggest act of discrimination? 3% of the population, 720 million out of the village economy. It can decimate people's lives, but you sit here in offices and then you don't understand the plight of those people. We, Mr. Speaker, notorious again for backpedaling after naming boards and recognizing that they got criticized for naming the boards. They're now backpedaling and saying that the boards will now, their composition will change. And the Constitutional Commission, or the members to agree on the terms of reference for the Constitutional Commission, they have now backpedaled and said they would include others. And Mr. Speaker, the airport project that they said they were against, and then they were for, and then they were against, and suddenly I saw they were for again. Mr. Speaker, they backpedal on the issue of bankruptcy. They backpedal on the issue of bankruptcy. I heard the Honorable Minister of Finance said, I didn't put that in my budget. But they've been claiming that we're bankrupt. And let me tell you, do not underestimate what that signal when you say something like that, what it means to the rest of the world. If investors hear you're bankrupt as a country, the sophisticated investors, they start thinking, well, the government will raise taxes if they're bankrupt. If the insurance companies start pushing the premium up because they say this is a risky country, for political risk insurance goes up. The cost of loan, interest rates go up. One little statement of that nature could make a huge difference. So, and this country is not bankrupt by any stretch of the imagination, as I demonstrated in the past. If it's bankrupt now, then it must have been hell in 1992. That's all right. And I say, Mr. Speaker, oh, you're begging, huh? You're begging. Mr. Speaker, I heard them regale us, the Honorable Member Gaskin saying, reputable investors will want to come in to Guyana if we change the framework. And is he saying that ExxonMobil is not reputable because they came before this new government came in here? And is he saying that CJX is not reputable? And is he saying that Guyana Goldfield is not reputable? And there are several others that are here now, that are investing, and that will be creating jobs that the minister was so proud to announce. And Mr. Speaker, what is more ominous? What is more ominous is that we passed a law in 2003, the Fiscal Enactments Act, and we sought to remove ministerial presence from processing duty-free concessions. So the channel has to be go invest, GRA, and then only in circumstances like tax holidays, it goes to the Minister of Finance. What we have replaced this now with, for the first time, we have a politician who has been reinserted into the system. So the Honorable Minister Gaskin now chairs Go Invest Board. So Mr. Speaker, let me tell you what happens. That now you have to send your applications to Go Invest. And Go Invest will examine your applications, chaired by the minister, and then make the recommendations to GRA for duty-free concessions. In the past, it was a technical body processed by another technical body in GRA. Now the minister now will decide when investors send their proposals to him, who gets concessions and who doesn't get. And you talk about transparency, it's shameful. It's a reinsertion of the politician. This is a recipe for corruption. It's a recipe for corruption, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, this government has a fetish for new, bright, shiny things. Cars, guards, building new arches, 10 flags. And Carl, please, Honorable Member Carl, please do not allow them to introduce a flag for Essequibo Region 2. Please do not allow them on other regions that are in the Essequibo. Please do not allow them to do that, because that is where they're going to start undermining the unity of a symbol that we all respect. One flag, one anthem. That is it. Do not do that. It would undermine. We already hear talk about issuing what? ID cards to our people. You can only reinforce it by doing this. So Mr. Speaker, the bright shiny things, we don't have to wait. I heard presentations. Let us get together and plan this 50th anniversary. And at that time, we will have introspection on where we are going and how we'll bring people together. We don't need to wait till next year. You have to do that now. You're not bringing people together. You're dividing them. You're dividing them. This nation is being divided right down the middle. And the Honorable Member Carl Greenidge mentioned about my court case. And I'm extremely proud, Mr. Speaker, of what I said. And this will be subject to private lawsuits. But when I said at the end of the speech that I made there, they omitted one statement when I said that had this happened in the PPP, we'll kick the person out. And so that is a matter that is before the courts. But I am going to be justified because my role, my record is clear. And the young member of parliament, the honorable member from Linden, in the 90s, when I took the staff of the Ministry of Finance, I don't think Winston went there, he didn't want to go, and we went and walked at night through places there, and we walked into West Watuka, and we went to Victory Valley and built bridges, and we sat with the community and worked up a development plan, and we got a grant from the European Union, LEAP and LEN. And when I walked through those areas in the 90s, where Amelia's Ward, a bright shining area is now, it was bauxite lands. And Block 22 was also barren land. And now we have thriving schemes there. And there was an old shabby hospital, and they have a spanking new hospital. And we got an investor for the bauxite industry. And right now we're implementing a water treatment plant. And we fixed the roads on Barnum Drive. It was impossible. And the people asked us to fix Barnum Drive, and we did it too. So our record with people, I've worked on the ground with people from Linden, not sit in offices here. And so our track record is a clear one. Mr. Speaker, now, Mr. Speaker, they have used the excuse in the past that we control the central government and they only control the region. Now you control both. And so in 3 years' time, if the petition succeeds, or 5 years' time, we will see you in Linden, and then you will have to account to the people, because you'd have both the central government and the region. So you talk about Angois Avenue. When I went in there and we sought to fix the road, your mayor said this is executive lawlessness because I sought to discuss with people and fix their roads. That is the kind of thing that we did in the past. So I don't have to worry too much. We'll be back on the campaign trail soon. In 38 months, we're back on the campaign trail. And we're coming back for power because we know you're gonna fail. We know with this sort of budget, you cannot succeed. You'll flatline the economy. You're not focused on people. You're focused on yourselves. Mr. Speaker, if this minister, the Minister of Finance, wanted to present a budget that had an element of stimulus, let us look at the GDP. He proposes to reduce gross domestic, the deficit from 5% to 2.9%. The budget was 4.9% in 2014, the budgeted figure. Assuming that he said, all right, let's go back with the budgeted figure, that would have given him close to $12 billion. $12 billion without it being inflationary, because that was the framework, the monetary framework in which the budget was crafted, and it looked at the monetary variable. It would have given him $12 billion more to spend without compromising our macroeconomic figures. Just going back to that deficit, he could have spent the $1.6 billion on our school children. He could have spent it. And I heard the Honorable Crossman. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, he could have given, that would have cost $1.6 billion. He could have given another 15% on the wages bill. That would have cost $6 billion. And that would have been. Yeah, man, Mr. Speaker, I heard words like stupid, etc. I didn't know I was getting so much under the minister's skin. Mr. Speaker, had he decided to go with the original framework, he could have given the public servants another 15% of wages and salaries on top of what they got, and it would have only cost $6 billion of the $12 billion available to him. And that would have increased private consumption. Remember that equation? That the GDP is equal to C plus I plus G plus net export. The C component would have gone up. People would have spent more. You could have stimulated the economy. You didn't do that. You could have spent more on police equipment. You could have done a number of things more without compromising the framework. But because I'm not presenting the budget, if I were presenting the budget, you wouldn't have a mediocre budget like that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry that I was speaking to the honorable member directly. Mr. Speaker, we have seen a budget that has nothing to do with people, nothing to do with jobs, nothing to do with public servants, the people who supported you. I want the honorable members on the other side, because I think, Mr. Speaker, that they themselves were shocked when they saw the measures that none of the members of the cabinet, and more so the junior ministers, never knew what was in the budget outside of a framework. They never saw the measures. They were shocked here when it was read to them. They didn't think. They're forced to defend things that many of them do not believe in. And so, Mr. Speaker, I heard a comment that I believe I'm King Kong. Mr. Speaker, let me say that they spoke about 40% unemployment. And I looked at the last budget that the honorable member Carl Greenidge presented, and it had 751,000 people living in Guyana, and it had a GDP of about 300 million. So the per capita GDP was under about $270, $280. Now it's $3.7 billion, $3.7 from $280. So if you're saying this is per capita, if you're saying that 40% of our people are unemployed, it means that the productivity of labor has gone up tenfold. The productivity of labor, because you're saying less employed people are creating more wealth. So you are saying something fantastic here. It's either it's true that the productivity of labor has gone up tenfold, or the figures are wrong. And I believe the figures are wrong, because today, on a per capita basis, we're controlling them. Mr. Speaker, I hope that the promises to the Amerindian people are kept. I hope that the low carbon development strategy doesn't disappear off the map, because it seems in the debate as though it has disappeared. This is money. This is money that we have earned as a country. I saw the Honorable Minister of Finance wrongly classifying it as financing. It should come in as revenue. This is money earned. This is money earned. It's more money earned. And money earned, it comes in as revenue. And Mr. Speaker, this was to catalyze big investment. It was to create a whole new range of industries that are low carbon in nature. The money was supposed to help to complete the demarcation exercise. It was supposed to help transform the village economies, 165 village economies. It was supposed to computerize those villages in the interior. It was supposed to set up a biodiversity center for international studies, so we can generate a new type of export that will create jobs. This is the framework. Two of the honorable members on the other side sat through a lot of those meetings that we had. Honorable Member Sidney Alicock and Honorable Member George. The extensive discussions we had, the extensive consultations. We have earned close to $250 million. I know the Honorable Member Ramjatan didn't want it released. He wrote the Norwegians several times. But now you're in government. And we will support the money flowing to this country, because it's coming to make changes to people's life right here in Guyana. But we have seen nothing about that. And the ICT project that we hear so much about, it is true that the cable to Brazil, the project failed because it was not placed properly. The project was $8 million. The cable got broken in several places because of faulty laying of the cable. But it's very different. It's very different than the $32 million project that we had with Huawei. This was supposed to build along the coast a fiber background that from one end of our country, from Crabble Creek, all the way to the Pomeroon, and going up to Linden and into Brazil. One backbone that would allow us to do e-governance. So we were already working on softwares for several modules. E-security, so the same CCTV cameras, etc., that the Honorable Member Ramjatan was talking about, could run on that background, connect all the police stations so we can have real-time accounting, connect the hospital so we could do e-medicine. We would have connected the Ministry of Agriculture, the entire government. And the second part of the project, and most importantly for me, was to do a free public Wi-Fi across Guyana to give homes up to 250K of bandwidth. The cable from Brazil should have brought in bandwidth at $500 per meg, which is significantly lower and would have lowered the government costs. So I would ask you, because I've not been dealing with this project for a while, but please reconsider the intent. And that is why we said 1 laptop per family. So 100,000 poor families now suddenly can connect to free Wi-Fi, and then the government is connected. We have a leap in terms of digital connectivity. And Mr. Speaker, I saw the honorable member mention one of the 4 or 5 strategic orientations of the budget to achieve in 2020 is a knowledge-based economy. A knowledge-based economy can only run on modern platforms. And the key platform has to be the ICT platform that connects people, that creates new jobs as a sector in itself, creating thousands of jobs like Qualfon and Teleperformance will and the others, but also being used to increase productivity in other areas, to connect your people, make sure that we're all computer literate, the entire country. This is the quantum leap we need as a country. That is the quantum leap we need. Not tinkering around the edges, giving 9,000 teachers the computers, although I'm happy for them that came for the Amerindian, is not a strategy. It is not a strategy. And we must also give the other people. Digicel had asked for permission to bring in a cable. We need 10 cables. Do you forgot I left office a long time back? The honorable member is forgetting that I left office a while back. But Mr. Speaker, we need several new cables, and even the DAX arrangement that I heard about this big corruption. So I sought to get some briefing on it, and they told me that the cable is broken. We had asked Digicel to do a study to see if they can take over the cable and give us a few strands on that same cable so we could bring in the bandwidth for government, and it would have gone to a center. The problem is that they said it's too costly. Digicel did an assessment and said it's too costly. So without any further cost to the government of Guyana, they were going to fix, this company would fix the cable, give us 2 strands, 12 strands, and that would have been enough for our bandwidth. So it didn't matter whether they got a lot of concessions, because the cost of fixing the cable is about $15 million that the government didn't have to pay. That is, it is the explanation. So in the haste to make us look corrupt, we have heard this. And by the way, on the audits, maybe I should come to audits. And we hope that when we raise the appropriate questions in this House, Mr. Speaker, we will get the answers. Because we believe this is a hugely corrupt act on the part of the government to single source audits running into hundreds of millions of dollars without any public tender. Mr. Speaker, the Audit Act of Guyana says the Auditor General is the external auditor of all public accounts. Number 2, it says the government may contract international agencies without prejudice to point 1. Point 3, it says the public accounts of Guyana, the minister may request the public accounts of Guyana to conduct an audit. And 4, it speaks about internal audit. When they're caught with their pants down, I've heard now that they're not calling this forensic audit anymore. They're calling it internal audit. Just to get past the legal issue of undermining our institutions, the audit office. Mr. Speaker, this is a travesty. We want an audit of Petro-Caribbean resources. Let us work together to develop the terms of reference. and bring in an internal auditor, a forensic auditor. We want to support the government of Guyana in an inquiry about all the extrajudicial deaths taking place in our country since independence. And if we want to build goodwill, could we start by reversing this travesty to the Walter Rodney Commission? Can we start by doing this? Mr. Speaker, we want, your manifesto says you have several things here. We will support an impartial investigation that you have in your manifesto for the Petro-Caribbean Fund, the Lotto, Skeldon, Enmore Sugar Plant, Marriott, the airport project, Amila, the specialty hospital. We are pledging here tonight to support any impartial review into those projects. We want a commission of inquiry into all election-related violence. And Mr. Speaker, we have demonstrated to this country a fresh approach. Although the difference in our votes, that is what was published by GCOM, is less than 5,000. You did not see people on this side asking people to burn the city. You didn't see them going and beating up people. You didn't see any of that. We, Mr. Speaker, that's a fresh approach. You imagine when in 1997 and 2001 and 2006, but more so 1997 and 2001, Mr. Speaker, when the difference was 20,000 votes, when the difference was over 20,000 votes, they refused to accept the results, put this country through trauma, burn the city. We had to have a Hermanson Accord. You think, just imagine, I want the people of this country to imagine that had the shoe been on the other foot and there was a difference of 5,000 votes and they were on the looting side, you want to bet we would have had problems in the city, burning buildings around the city. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have demonstrated a fresh approach to maturity of this country. We filed our petition, we will fight them. We are not here to defend only the interests of the 200,000 people who voted for us, Mr. Speaker. We will defend their interests vigorously, whether they're sugar workers, or rice farmers, or bauxite workers, or Amerindians. We will defend their interests. But we have an obligation to all the people of this country. We have an obligation. And trust me, we will support the other side. We don't believe in profiting off the misery of people. We're not gonna, 3 years, you talk about slowing down the economy and cut $90 billion from it in 3 years, and you talk about slowing down of the economy. We're not gonna cut projects for that, for the sake of cutting them. We will not oppose for the sake of opposition. If an initiative is good, we will support it. If an initiative is good, we'll support it. If it brings benefits to our people, whether they're in bauxite, or sugar, or rice, or public servants, or in retail trade, or in the wharf, and we will support it. But trust me, we're going to hold you to account on those things that are anti-national. Trust me. Mr. Speaker, we are going to vigorously defend the people of this country. And so I urge my colleagues on the other side to ensure that this obsession with new things, that you focus quickly on tackling the people's problems. We hope that you are not going to, as was announced by the Ministry of Finance, block our students who owe money to the student loan scheme when they wish to travel. I hope that the honorable member, Mr. Ramjatan, would not give lectures to our young people about where they should go and how they should spend their money. That's none of the government's business. That's none of your business. We hope that instructions will not be given to constitutional bodies. We hope that and when they refuse to carry it out, they're subjected to barrage of criticism. We hope that doesn't happen. We hope that there will be a serious attempt to address the crime situation. We were told before the elections that this government had all the plan. They had all the plan. They had all the security experts. They will do a better job than the PPP, that they were just waiting to implement it. To my surprise, after the situation escalated, and Mr. Speaker, as we're here, I wish to express condolences to all those people, including the family from quarantine, that had one person brutally shot in our head. Brutally shot. The condolences to those people in Barbies who are going through a trauma now. We should all be sorry and do something about it. It's no time to play politics, and Mr. Speaker, it's no time for incompetence. It's no time for incompetence when our people are bleeding. We had a well thought out plan, including, and the Honorable Member Felix knows about this. We had a well thought out plan, succession plan, 49 cadet officers trained by the Army to go into the police force that I directed. Mr. Speaker, the cats and dogs approach and horses approach will not work. The minister who walks around and tells people, if you don't do this, I'll shut you down, etc. Mr. Speaker, too many people are suffering. We are prepared to work with the government to ensure that a properly conceived plan and a properly implemented plan is pursued. Mr. Speaker, to my surprise, after making all these claims to the electorate, the president had to hurriedly convene a meeting to discuss the crime situation because the minister is not delivering. So, Mr. Speaker, there are a large number of things that I want to ask the Honorable Member Jordan too. I want to ask him how come after promising the reduction in VAT, and we heard some fancy economics from one gentleman, one member of parliament who talked about the effective rate, etc. Well, this year, there are 2 billion increase in VAT collection over last year after there was a promise by the minister and APNU to reduce the VAT rate. The VAT rate, the collection has gone up by $2 billion. You've taken $2 billion more out of people's pocket after you promised to reduce it, to reduce the rate. Mr. Speaker, I overdo. Mr. Speaker, the members on this side of the House, we want to work with the government. I've made it clear. We want to work with the government, but we're no pushover. We're not because we're in opposition, they would think that they will get a free rein in this country. You'll be watching the members on the other side carefully. And this budget can't move the private sector forward, does not change the circumstances in the country. It will never deliver the good life that the minister spoke about. So, Mr. Speaker, as I want to thank you for you listening, and I just wanted to say one thing. That I made a statement, Mr. Speaker. I made a statement that I will never, and the people on this side will never allow the members on the government side to make us victims. We're never going to allow you to take away from us rights that have been earned through sweat and blood in this country. We're never going to allow you to change willy-nilly parliamentary traditions. And so, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the time given to me. I thank you for the extra time too. It was your decision because the government side was trying to contain me to 1 hour when I sat in this parliament as Minister of Finance. And Mr. Hoyt spoke for over 2 hours. And we on the other side supported 3 extensions for him. Because we were not afraid of what he had to say. He had a duty. He had a duty to the people of the country as opposition leader. So I had to confront with 3 speakers before me and then 2 speakers after me when the tradition has been that the penultimate speaker is the opposition leader. And I'm not gonna, so for us here tonight, the debate for the People's Progressive Party, our debate in this National Assembly has just ended. Thank you very much.